Hey guys, one of the most important things you can do as writers is use quotations effectively. This gives you a lot of credibility as a writer, it improves the quality of your evidence, and on a more immediate level, it counts as 10% of your writing grade for this class. So today I want to talk to you a little bit about how to punctuate, contextualize, and blend your quotes effectively so that you can get all fours or fives in those areas. First of all, I just want to show you the quotes that I'll be using for examples today. They're both from F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. The first one reads, "A sudden emptiness seemed to flow now from the windows and the great doors." And the second one is simply San Francisco. So you'll see what those are all about in just a minute here. First, let's talk about punctuating quotes correctly. Here's a checklist for you that I'd like you to take down. And this really goes through all the elements of punctuating correctly. First of all, do you use quotation marks? Second of all, is an introductory comma necessary, and if so, do you use it? Are brackets necessary to make the verb tense consistent? We'll talk about what that means in just a minute. Is the source citation formatted properly? Is the source citation in the right place? And finally, is end punctuation in the right place? So let's look at a couple of examples and see how this works. The first example reads, "As Gatsby's party ends, Nick notes that a sudden emptiness seems to flow from the house." First thing I want you to notice, where are the quotation marks? They're at the beginning and then at the end of the quotation. Make sure you always have quotation marks in the right place. Second of all, I want you to notice where the citation is. The citation doesn't come right after the quotation mark, it comes at the very end of the sentence. You will also notice that the period in the sentence comes following the citation. Let's talk a little bit about the format of the citation itself. In MLA format, you need to have two things in a parenthetical citation. First of all, you need to have an author's last name, or the first word of the full reference, and a page number. You'll notice that I don't have a comma between the author's last name, that I don't have a P period before the page number. It's just last name, page number. Bam, finished. The last thing I want you to notice about this quote is the word seems. You'll see that it's in brackets. The reason I've put this in brackets is because the original quotation has the word seemed, past tense, in there. I want to change seemed to fit the tense of my own writing. You'll notice that I say Nick notes that a sudden emptiness seems to flow from the house. I want all my verbs in my essay to be in present tense. So I've used brackets to change the tense of the word seemed. It just kind of tells the reader that I'm using essentially the same word here. I'm just changing the tense from what the author originally had. Now let's look at a second example. When Nick asks Gatsby what Midwestern city he's from, Gatsby says San Francisco. The difference between this quote and the first one is that I have introduced the quote with the word says. Whenever you introduce a quote with the word says or asks or something to that effect, you'll always have a comma right after that, followed by the quotation. So it says, comma, San Francisco. You'll notice that I don't have that with the first quote because I don't introduce it with the word says or asks or some other word like that. All right, let's talk about how to contextualize quotes. To contextualize really means to briefly explain the circumstances surrounding a quote. So let's look at how I've done that with these examples. As Gatsby's party ends, Nick notes that. That's the context. I'm telling the reader where this quote is coming from so they can have an idea of when the quote is occurring and the circumstances surrounding that quote. Let's look at the second example. When Nick asks Gatsby what Midwestern city he's from, so again, I'm giving the reader an idea of where the quote is occurring in the novel. So remember, to contextualize something is to explain the circumstances surrounding it. All right, let's move on to blending the quotes. To blend a quote means that we make the quote flow naturally with our own language. So let's see how I've done that with these quotes, or at least with the first one. As Gatsby's party ends, Nick notes that a sudden emptiness seems to flow from the house. If you remove the quotation marks and the citation from this sentence, you'll notice that a reader won't really be able to tell where the quote begins and where it ends. The quote flows very smoothly with my own writing. So have a look at that second example. You'll notice that if it weren't for the first example, you wouldn't be able to tell where the quote begins and ends. It reads very smoothly. As Gatsby's party ends, Nick notes that a sudden emptiness seems to flow from the house. All right, so let's go over our checklist one more time. For punctuation, we need quotation marks in the right places. We need an introductory comma if it's necessary. We need to use brackets if necessary to change the verb tense to match our own. We need to have a source citation that's in the right place, that's formatted properly, and finally the end punctuation needs to follow that source citation. In order to contextualize our quote, we need to explain the circumstances surrounding it. Give a reader a clue as to where this quote is coming from, but do it very briefly. And finally, in order to blend the quote, we need to make sure that it flows nicely with our own writing. Hopefully this gives you a good idea of what you need to do in order to use quotes properly in your paper so that you can get a 4 in both quotation scores on the writing rubric and so that you can have really solid credibility as a writer. Thanks guys, and be sure to bring any questions with you to class.